I'd like to start off by saying if it wasn't for the grace of God, I wouldn't be here. And I definitely want to start and lay that foundation, and also to honor all the victims. Oftentimes when we get out of prison, people get so caught up in our success story that they forget that we harm people. And the price that I paid to become the man that I am today is that I actually hurt a lot of people in the process. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge that. I grew up in Watts and to a single mother. I had two older siblings, and my father's been incarcerated my whole life. My mother had me at the age of 21. I want to say before I tell my story that I hold no resentment towards my mother. She did the best that she can. Oftentimes, we just reenact the trauma that was handed down to us. My grandmother was a schizophrenic. She had mental health issues. My grandfather was murdered at work, and my grandmother turned to drugs. She didn't know how to handle it, and as a result, my mother was repeatedly abused throughout her childhood. So when she had us, she did the best that she could. But growing up in a household, I was the youngest of three, and my mother raised us in the streets. She raised us to be tough. She raised us to survive in a gang-infested neighborhood. We grew up in the Jordan projects, but I was a different kind of child. I was sensitive. I wanted to be under my mother. I always wanted hugs and kisses, and at the time, that was presenting problems because in my neighborhood, it made me get bullied, picked on. And so my siblings would often try to toughen me up, make me fight. You need to learn how it is. You need to stop crying. And oftentimes I felt neglected, I felt unloved, I felt devalued because I wanted just affection. And I didn't understand that they were trying to equip me to survive in my environment. But what that did was it caused me to have low self-esteem. So at the age of 6 years old, I started to go to my family's on my dad's side, and as a result, I ended up being sexually abused from the age of 6 to 13. I was abused by 4 different men repeatedly. At the age of 9, it went from molestation to outright rape. Throughout the process, I internalized it. I didn't tell my mother. I was afraid to tell my mother. I didn't tell my siblings. I didn't tell anyone. One time, I attempted to tell my grandmother, and she whooped me. And what I realized today was she didn't whoop me because I told her what was going on. She whooped me because she didn't know how to handle it, right? Like, when I told her I was being abused, all she heard was it was happening under her supervision. And so I joined the gang at 11 years old. I used to be from the gang called Grape Street in Watts. And I vividly remember being in elementary. There was this guy, he wanted to fight me. I didn't want to fight. I was on punishment. My mother told me I had to be home by a certain period. I didn't make it home, and in the state of fear, I turned all my fear into anger and rage and resentment, and I turned it onto that person. And when I saw the fear in his eyes and the fact that he ran, I made a decision that day that I was no longer going to be a victim, that I was going to be the victimizer. Well, what happened that day was, as the adrenaline came down, I was surrounded by a group of people. And now I'm sitting here crying, and I'm in a state of panic because I'm afraid that people are going to ask me, where did the anger come from? But that question never came. What I heard was, oh man, you're down for the hood, and oh, we always knew you had it in you. And what I realized that day, I created a persona. Some people went to the gangs to get love. Some people went to the gang because they wanted to feel a part of something. I went to the gang because it was an excuse for me to hurt people. I didn't want to tell people I was being molested. So in CGA, it talks about the mask we wear. My mask was, as a gang member, it was appropriate to be violent. It was appropriate to be aggressive. It was appropriate to be breaking the law. And so I want to back up a little bit because I want to tell you about the first time I stole. I went to the store and I stole candy, and I came home and I was whooped for stealing. And I remember asking, like, well, what did I do wrong? Am I not supposed to steal? And the answer was, I'm not whooping you because you stole, I'm whooping you because you stole candy. If you're gonna steal, you need to steal to provide for this house. So I went back and I stole, I filled my jacket up with pork chops and ribs and all this stuff, right? And I remember bringing it home, and my mother cooked us a meal, and she gave me a big plate. And she said, today, Fred became a man, he provided for our household. And I wanna back up and say, it was really hard for me when I went to CGA because CGA presented that being a gang member and a criminal is an addiction. I couldn't see it because how can I be addicted to something I've only known my whole life? Like there was no other reference for me. So when people are talking about OCP, obsession, compulsion, progression, they're talking about breaking rules, it didn't register because my rules were always rooted in the streets. I was always taught to fight. I was always taught not to share what was going on in the household. I was always taught not to trust the police. I was always taught these things. So when I started to hear that I could be addicted to the criminal lifestyle, it was really, really hard for me. And I remember going to a CGA in Lancaster, and it started off, the question was, what was the dream you had when you was young? Who did you want to be? And I said, I want to be a firefighter. And they said, what happened? I said, well, I grew up. Things happened, family got killed, I grew out of that. They said, okay. So they said, how old were you when you chose to be a gang member? And you know, we started raising our hands, 18, 17, 16, 15. And I'm like, well, I was 11 years old when I chose to be a gang member. And he said, I don't fault you for choosing the gang, you did the best you can. What I fault you for is making a decision at 11 years old and choosing to stay with it as an adult, where when you had a dream when you was a kid, you let that go to choose the gang life. And that really opened my eyes, because majority of my life I blamed everybody else. I blamed the abuse, I blamed my father, I blamed my mother, I blamed my neighborhood. But then I started running into people who had been abused before, or who had been raped, or who had been shot. And they didn't choose to rob, they didn't choose to join a gang, they didn't choose to kill someone. So it started to make me look within. And so going back to 11 years old, when I joined the gang, I started learning that violence was a solution to my problems. I stopped being bullied, the girls started liking me more. I went and assaulted the person who abused me, and he was now afraid of me. So now I had this new persona, right? I found an identity that I could be proud in, because I felt that I was less than a man because I was being abused. But what happened was shame kicked in. I started feeling shameful because no one knew that I was carrying these images and I was reliving the abuse over and over and over. And what happened was I couldn't be comfortable in my own skin. So I started to overcompensate. When there was things going on within my neighborhood, I was always raising my hand, because now I'm trying to prove to people who didn't even know what I was going through that I was more than that little boy who was taken advantage of. So at the age of 16 years old, how old are you two, if you don't mind me asking?
We're both 15.
15. I'm so happy to see you here. It's an amazing thing for you guys to be so young and be in this space. I was 16 years old when I was arrested. I was facing 430 years and 6 life sentences for multiple carjackings. I received a 30-year sentence at 17 years old. And they gave me 9 years for carjacking, 1 year for robbery, 10 years for a gun enhancement, and 10 years for a gang enhancement. At the age of 18, I got sent to High Desert, and at 17 years old in prison, I gave my life to Christ. I stopped gangbanging. I started working on myself. But when I got to prison, I realized that there were certain rules and certain code of ethics that I had to follow, or I told myself I had to follow to be safe. And I remember in YA, my mother came to visit me, and I told her I stopped gangbanging. And she asked me why. And I'm like, well, I want to live for God. I want to do better. She's like, no, why now? Why did you wait till you go to prison? And I got upset. And I told my mother, I said, well, you have one decision to make. Either you stop gangbanging or don't come visit me. And my mother stopped visiting me for years, which was very, very hurtful. But I understand that I gave her an ultimatum that she wasn't able to face at the moment. But when I got to prison, she came to visit me. And when I walked in the room, she started crying. I was behind the glass because by the time she made it to High Desert, we were already on lockdown. And I asked her, I said, why are you crying? And she said, because you look happy. And I remember telling her, I said, Mom, I grew up around murders, pimps, gang members. Like, prison isn't a big deal. And at the time, I was trying to ease her, but now I look back on that statement, I see how sad and tragic that statement was, because I was 18 years old in a maximum state prison, 150 pounds, and I wasn't afraid because I had already told myself I was going to prison. I had already prepared for it mentally, right? So throughout the course of my 16 years in prison, I started to play with cell phones. I started to break the rules. I started to be more manipulative. And I ended up getting caught with a cell phone in 2018. I went through a very painful divorce. And in the process of that divorce, I realized that what's the point of me getting out of prison if I haven't changed? I may have separated from the game, but my mentality was the same. I still didn't talk to the police. I still didn't talk to other races. I still didn't open up. And that's what led me to CGA. CGA taught me that OCP, that the cycle of addiction is when you have a thought that's obsessive and you continue to think about it, you feel compelled to act on it, and it doesn't please you, so then you go to the next level and all of a sudden now you're addicted. What I found was, as a result of growing up in my household, I developed low self-esteem, I developed codependency, I had toxic masculinity, and I believed that aggression and violence was the solution to all my problems. And I also realized that I couldn't do it on my own. The reason Mike and Beth says, they're happy to see me is because their son is my best friend, and he's white. And in CGA, they asked me a question. They said, "Why do you only talk to people that are your race?" And everybody gave all these answers, and my answer was because I am afraid to accept the lies I've told myself about other people. And I was unable to grow because everyone around me understood my culture. Right? If we all grew up in a gang culture, then we all had some kind of bias towards it. But when I met Adam and I started talking to him about if someone stepped on your shoe, you have a right to do this. And if someone gets at your girl, and he's like, God. He started to challenge me. And I realized that I had never really been challenged. I've always been articulate. I've always been smart. When I came to prison, I had a 4.0. I've always been able to kind of skate between. But then I met people who was like, we're not impressed by your intelligence. Why should it be something that we applaud you for that you're smart? That's not enough. Don't you want more for yourself? Don't you want to become somebody that is honorable? Don't you want to leave a legacy? And that's when I started to realize, wait a minute, at some point I gotta stop blaming my race. I gotta stop blaming my upbringing. And then I also learned the CGA, the pro-social definition of a ganger, which is two or more people involved in criminal activity who look alike, dress alike, talk alike. And I started to look around and see that, wait, I need to try something different. I need to dress different. I need to learn how to stop speaking in ebonics. I need to go to school. I need to actually look within and find something. So since I've been home, I just want to talk a little bit about since I've been home. I was released in early May, and 2 days later, my 12-year-old cousin was murdered. And what it did was, it ignited a lot of shame and guilt because, like I was explaining to Beth, I felt that I was responsible for that murder. Because as a gang member, they've always asked me, Fred, what is your biggest regret? Is it going to prison? Is it committing crimes? Is it this? And I'm like, no. My biggest regret is every person I convinced to be like me. Every person I convinced to go deeper into the gang culture. Every girl I convinced to share her body with me, to prove that she loved me. And so when I got home and I found out that little Eric was murdered, I felt responsible because I realized that the cycle was still going and that I still have a part to play. And so last month, my uncle was murdered. Renee, you don't know this, but Deli attempted suicide about 2 months ago. And so Janet started off with a success story. And oftentimes we see the success story, but we don't see what's behind the success story. We don't see that I've been dealing with grief. I've been dealing with post-incarceration syndrome, where I was explaining to Beth right now, where I didn't realize I was going to be looking for the permission to live since I've been home. I didn't realize I was going to have a hard time making decisions. I didn't realize I was going to have a hard time telling my daughter no because I've been gone for so long that I didn't want to get on her bad side, not realizing that as her father, it's up to me to set these boundaries. I didn't realize that I was exploiting myself, showing up to all these events and speaking and not actually demanding time for me. And so I don't know if I covered everything, and I'm open for questions and any specific topics, but ultimately I'm 33 years old, and my goal is, most people wait till they're 40, they're 50. Some people wait till they go to prison. At 33 years old, I'm out here presenting a narrative saying you don't have to wait until you're till you're at rock bottom. You don't have to wait until something happens. That there are people who are providing resources and we're willing to walk with you. I have been fortunate enough to be certified as a peer support specialist at the Prison Way. I was a credible messenger with Healing Dialogue in Action, where I was going into the juvenile halls and mentoring the youth. I've given a lecture at Cal State LA about collective gang violence. I've done work with GRID, which is Gang Recidivism Youth Diversion Program, about narrative therapy practices. So it's happening, right? Success is coming, but ultimately, like, I'm really here for you to actually show you that, for one, don't take your youth for granted. I was 16 years old. I got arrested one time. I've never been in and out of the halls. I've never been involved with law enforcement. And the first time I ever got arrested, I was gone for 16 and a half years. But I'm also here for you who lost your nephew, and I'm sorry, and I'm sending my condolences. But as a person who was part of the problem, I'm now part of the solution. And I'm here to just continue to inspire and be like the narrative or a message of hope. Because it is possible. Prison isn't saving people. People are saving people. And it's up to us to continue to just throw our hat in there. And sometimes it gets overwhelming because it's like, how can we save everyone? Well, you don't need to save everyone. Just save one person at a time, right?
And now we're going to open up for questions. Anyone has questions?
I have a comment. Brett, I'm glad you're saying truly, because I know where you spent the better part of your life. You know, we've been there, we visited, we've seen everything. And for those of you here, I had no idea what this was going to be like. There's a lot of grief in this room, and you know, we're very fortunate. We still have a son in prison. By the grace of God, he'll be out soon. But you know, my heart goes out to all of you. And Fred, just like I told you earlier, take time to breathe. Take time to breathe, my friend. This is great stuff, but take time for yourself. Catch your breath. You know.
Proud of you. You
Very.
don't have to prove anything to anybody.
Exactly.
We're very proud of you.
So you were released in May, after how many years?
I did 16 and a half years.
16. And you started there, like learning about the program?
Yeah, I started going to groups really because it was expected of me. But what I started learning was I had experienced a lot of trauma, right? Like, it was normal for me getting whoopings, fighting, the gang violence. When I was 12-year-old, I watched my cousin get murdered in front of me. So like, I didn't even realize that I was carrying all of these things. And so going to the groups gave me the avenue where I was able to talk, first and foremost. Where I grew up in a culture where you don't talk about your problems. You just toughen it out and you keep pushing. But having those safe places like this to talk gave me access to compassion. I didn't know what compassion was. I never felt empathy. I never had someone actually see me as a human being and cry when I tell them my story. And I'm like, why are you crying? Everybody goes through that. And people are like, no, everybody doesn't go through that. And what I realized was I was resilient. Like, I actually learned something from it. And I gave myself time to heal. And that's been the most important thing, is like taking the time to say, it's not okay what I went through. It's not okay that I chose to join the gang. It's not okay that I hurt people, but I can't go back and change it. It's part of the serenity prayer, right? The courage to accept the things I can't change. What can I change today? Well, I can change who I interact with. I can change the way I present myself. I can change what I give my energy to. And I can change the ripple effect that I live. This is part of my positive ripple effect.
Well, I'm very happy for you. This May is not a long time, and it seems like you're on the right path.
Thank you.
Very happy you'll be in our prayers.
I appreciate that.
Fred, you've been working on it a long time though. It's a journey. It's
Yeah.
a journey, right? Then to follow you. So maybe you made wrong choices when you were young, but you have reinvented yourself. And I think CDCR plays a role in that. in the rehabilitation, but I think the groups that you guys as inmates developed and worked together as human beings, sharing very diverse, very different backgrounds and lives, made you all very empathetic and understanding of the diversity that everybody has grown up in. And most everybody that's in there has had some kind of hurt in their life. And hurt people hurt people. And you guys talking about it together, not only was part of your journey, but you affected many other people in their lives and their journey. So thank you. They do miss you.
Being formerly incarcerated and being out and not having a lot of family support, how was I able to like trust people and maintain healthy relationships? Well, for me, like I was sharing, my growth came from relationships. It came from meeting people who were willing to hold me accountable, and it also came from actually being of service to other people. So a lot of the success that I've had has come from relationships that I've built in prison. It's come from being social. It's come from realizing that life just sucks sometimes, right? Instead of like making it personal and looking for reasons to be upset, I just open my heart and be vulnerable and realize that I'm going to get hurt and I can't stop it. The only thing I can do is respond to it in a way that I can live with.
One of my family members, because I also have a mother that's incarcerated, I have an uncle that's incarcerated, and I don't see them changing their lives. So when I see one of my cousins coming home from prison in such a short amount of time, that inspires me to be a better person as I get older, because I see other people around me that wants to change, because I also grew up in an environment that wasn't okay, that was so used to seeing the violence and used to seeing people get killed. Like I have my uncle, 14 years ago, he got shot in front of my home while we were all asleep, and that kind of disrupted my family, and it was really painful. So I'm glad to see that he's changed. My mother been in prison for gonna be 14 years, and I don't see any change. She speak of change, and she said when she come home, hopefully she come home soon, but I think she should stay, not like that, but I think she needs to stay longer, because I don't see any change. She still speaks the same, she still walk the same, she's not changed. My uncle, he's still in prison, he ain't changing, he's still whining like a little baby, but he ain't changing. So I think they should need to stay in that environment a little longer so they can change like Fred. Because I think you're doing an amazing job. Yeah.
I still remember getting the letter line.
My question is, go back and talk to yourself, 6-year-old self, 7-year-old self, what would you tell them? After getting that message from their mom, that it's okay.
I would tell them it's okay to cry. Right? It's okay to feel. It's okay to have your own voice and your own thoughts. But I also would tell them, reach out, like talk to people. Right? You have more options than you're telling yourself, and that it's not your fault. People will make decisions that will cause you pain, but it's not because of you. People make decisions for whatever reason they make decisions, and you're gonna be okay. But if you could just find the strength and the courage to talk to someone, then you will get there faster. But ultimately, I also would tell them, like, thank you for your strength, right? Like, for so long, I neglected that part of me, and I was so angry at the things that happened, and I personalized it, that I didn't even realize that 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old boy was strong because he didn't give up, right? Like, I thought about suicide multiple times, but I kept going. And for a long time, I neglected the resilient part of me because I didn't see myself as a survivor. And so I would tell that 6-year-old that you're a survivor and that you're going to survive a whole lot of things, and this pain that you're going to encounter, that you're feeling now, is going to uplift so many people. And you'll be able to find joy again. You'll be able to find peace again.
At what point does your faith help you, or how you start practicing your faith or believing in God, or to start the change? I mean, what was the point of conversion?
When I was 12, I read the Bible and I understood it clear, but it bred a resentment in me, because I'm like, if God is so good, why am I still being abused? Why am I being neglected? Why am I being bullied? And I made a decision at 13 that, okay, there are good people in the world, I'm just not going to be one of them. And so at 17 years old, I was in CGA and YA, and they asked me a question. They said, out of 100% of your crimes, how many were against your rival gang members? And I'm 17, I'm boastful, I'm poking my chest on them, I'm like, oh, 100% of my crimes. So he responds and he says, every store you stole from, every car you broke into, every girl you slept with. Like, he started going down this list, and I'm like, those are not crimes. And he's like, if the police catch you, would you go to jail? And I'm like, yeah. And so he asked me again, and I hung my head. And the response was 30% of my crimes were against my rivals, and 70% were against the neighborhood that I claim to represent. And what it did, for the first time as a gang member, I felt powerless. I felt weak. I felt like, here I was telling myself that I was a gang member and I was protecting people, but in reality, I was just using it as an excuse to hurt people. So I ended up, some missionaries came and gave us a Bible. And I'm not gonna lie, I was high off marijuana, I'm reading the Bible, and I'm reading a story about Jesus saying that if you will believe in me and follow me, I'll save you. And I'm like, this is so contradictory to what my older homies is telling me. Well, if you believe in us and you love us, you'll kill someone, you'll rob someone, you'll do this. And it sparked a thought. And I started hearing voices. I now know scripture. And I accused the person who gave me the marijuana of lacing me with drugs. So I was like, hey bro, you gave me some crack last night. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm hearing voices. And he's like, what are the voices saying? And I started telling him, he's like, no, you've been talking about stepping away from the gang for a while. But I didn't have the courage because my whole identity was tied to Grape Street. So the next day, I read the Bible again, and I threw the Bible under the bed because I'm like, oh, I'm a gang member, I'm not gonna read the Bible. And I lay in my bed and I got these headphones on, I can't hear the music. Because now I'm thinking about, why can I not step away from the gang? Like, now I feel challenged as a man. Because there was a guy who said, Fred, you can't stop banging. You don't have the courage to stop banging. And so I'm laying in bed, I'm like, well, why can't I stop banging? I heard a voice that said, because you never tried to stop for me. So when I sit up in my bed, I'm like, well, who is me? And the Bible I threw under the bed was in the middle of my floor. So I got on my knees and I said, God, I don't know if this is real, I don't know if this is of you, but if it is, I'll take the first step and stop gangbanging if you do the rest. And from that moment, I stopped gangbanging. And I haven't been a gang member since June 7, 2008. And people ask me, why did it take faith to give you like that push? And the reality is, I was afraid, right? I was afraid of exposure. I was afraid of, like, how is the world going to receive me when I take this mask off, right? Because I had gotten so used to lying that I started to believe my own lies. But faith, right? Like the belief that God loved me enough to send his son and that all things are new, right? Like if anyone is in Christ Jesus becomes a new creature, now I have something to believe in, and that gave me that push I needed to step out and be myself.
I have a question for you, Brad. Program that you went through in prison, it's changed quite a bit. It's getting progressively better and more effective. But you mentioned a mask. Tell me about a mask in prison and how difficult that is to partake in these courses.
Are very beneficial because what it does is it provides information that I didn't have before, right? Like I grew up in a culture where mental health wasn't talked about, addiction was normal, violence was normal, lying was normal, right? We would be in a room and know a person is lying and no one would challenge them because it's like, well, I'm lying myself, right? Well, these groups provided, for one, a safe place. And that was really important because I never felt safe. Like I grew up, my first act of violence I ever saw was in my household. So having somewhere I can go and walk into a room where there's individuals who made me feel safe to even talk about what I was going through was the first thing. The second thing was I didn't have a father figure growing up. So when I was stepping in these spaces, there were men who I was able to look up to who were modeling the very things that I'm reading in these like pamphlets, right? Like I'm seeing people say, hey, I'm going through this, or I'm seeing men cry for the first time and not try to hide their tears. Or I'm reading things that for so long I thought I was broken, I thought I was damaged. And then I hear about low self-esteem and I'm like, oh, there's a name for that? Or I hear about codependency and I'm like, oh, there's a name. And what happens is, once I was able to name it, I can go research it. And then I realized that there are coping skills to this, and there are avenues to where I can actually work on myself, and then there are people who are willing to walk with me. And so having that space, having spaces like this is really important because oftentimes when I started or I wanted to change, I didn't know how, right? She talks about my cousin. A lot of people want to change, but they don't know how, or it just gets scary, right? Like it was terrifying stepping into different avenues where it was uncomfortable admitting my wrongs. It was uncomfortable speaking in front of people. It was uncomfortable talking about my household, right? Like in the black culture, you don't talk about your mother. You don't, actually, that's a lie. Most people don't talk about their mother, period. But to step into these spaces and to realize and have people like, you know, he's gonna be uncomfortable. This is one of my mentors while I was in prison, his name's Alan. And to have someone pull me to the side and say, hey, I noticed that when we got to a certain topic, you hesitated. Do you feel like you'll be able to grow by holding that back? That was accountability. That was me being challenged. That was me being encouraged to step out of my comfort zone. And I wouldn't have done that if I wasn't in those spaces. I wouldn't have. I just would have accepted my normal as my normal.
Fred, are you gonna go back in?
Yes, we by the grace of God, I work with an organization with the Prison Way, and we're looking at potentially partnering up with CIM, and we're going to be doing it. And I'm just waiting for the call.
Because what's the difference between those that choose to program and those that they're speaking of that don't choose to program? Is more of the influence that you have in the groups that you guys formed your own groups there.
Yeah.
A lot of you had contacts outside and brought them in. Somehow we have to get more of that.
Yeah.
These programs that they're included. I just saw a lot of change, and I think you were a big catalyst in that. And you going and reaching back in. Sometimes we wait for people to come home before we try and do all this.
Yeah.
It would be so much more beneficial if we do in-reaches rather than outreaches.
I agree. Why haven't they made that connection? And it's simply because they haven't had a connection with someone to spark it, right? And so like that's what I'm looking for is going back. Like I don't believe that I myself am the solution. I believe that when I connect with someone and I have a genuine conversation with them and I'm relatable with them and I share my experiences, what is built there is rapport, trust, and empathy. And one of the biggest things as a formerly incarcerated individual is that I need to be seen as a human being. I don't want to be seen as my crime. I don't want to be seen as a number. I don't even want to be seen as some marginalized population. I want to be seen as a person who has done things but has the potential to change. And you cannot teach that. There's no colleges to teach it. There's no centers. We, through lived experience, have learned how to connect with human beings because we ourselves had to fight to connect, right? We connected with God. We connected with our families. We connected with our victims in ways to where we found that desire to give back. And so I'm really looking forward to going back in because ultimately, like I said, we're the solution, right? Like there are a lot of people with good intentions, but when you step into that space, people feel you. They don't just want to hear you, they want to feel you.
It's lived experience.
Yeah.
Is if I went in and tried to teach, they're gonna look at me like, but
Absolutely.
because you've had that lived experience and you've touched lives inside, going back in and touching more lives.
One of your friends got shot or like something like that. Like I just want to ask, like, how are you supposed to like deal with like seeing one of your own best friends, you know, like get shot or like die in your hands, you know, like bleeding out. Like how are you supposed to like overcome that?
There's no blueprint, right? Like supposed to, or like there's no one way of dealing with it because it's going to affect everyone differently. The only thing I would say is that you reach out to someone who you feel safe talking to, and you talk about how you feel, all of your feelings, right? Oftentimes when we step into these spaces, we only talk about the good feelings. No, talk about the anger, talk about the grief, talk about the sadness, talk about the resentment, because if not, it's just going to build and build and build, and it'll come out in a form that's unhealthy, not only for you, but for other people. I was fortunate enough where I didn't get that help when I was 12. When I watched my cousin get murdered, I felt shame and I felt like I should have done something. I was 12 years old, what could I have done, right? And if I had someone to open up to, they would have told me that, like, hey, there's not much you could have done in that situation. But when I came home and my little cousin was murdered, I was fortunate enough to have someone who actually took me to the beach and talked me through it. And just having that outlet was enough to take the pressure off to where I was able to like be okay with the fact that I'm grieving. Oftentimes we don't talk about grief. We don't talk about loss. And so I don't know if that's something you experience, but reach out to someone. Reach out to someone that you trust, that is relatable, and that you know has your best interest.
That's what I was going to say.
Just talk to
somebody
them.
that has his best.
Because that's really important. Like oftentimes you can damage yourself by opening up to the wrong person.
Amen.
So you have to find people that are first and foremost trustworthy, and just open up to them and just be open-minded and just be okay with the fact that whatever you feel is not you. They're emotions. I don't want to say they're just emotions. They're your emotions. How you respond to it is your choice, and how you move forward.
Is your father a gang banger?
Yes, my father is a gang member. He's still incarcerated. He's been incarcerated my whole life.
Well, it says 1 Peter 3:15, but in your heart set apart Christ as Lord for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. I just want to compliment you that I feel like you're following God's path for you. You're very intelligent and articulate, and He's going to use you in a great way. You know, like she was saying, we all can't go into prisons, but even though I can relate to your story, you can reach so much more, you know. And I had a question. Did CGA come first and then your faith, and how far into, I mean, how did you get involved with CGA?
I got involved in Lancaster.
In prison?
In prison,
Okay.
yes.
And how far into your sentence was that?
I was 23 years old, so I was 7 years into my sentence.
Okay. All right, well, I just want to thank you if I don't get the chance for sharing your story.
And thank you for sharing with us about your sobriety.
Thank you.
It's a great accomplishment.
Thank you.
You said that, you know, your father has advice, or what would be what you would, there's my daughter next to me. So, but with you, as you are, you know, a child that, you know, didn't have that, you know, like what advice would you give?
Sorry, because I didn't even realize how impactful it was not having a father. So I feel that. What I would say is, it's easy to get caught up in what I didn't have, and I overlooked the male role models that I did. And so, even though there may not be a father figure, there are other men who are there and who are trying to be there. And I would say, don't hold a resentment towards them because they're not your father, because they still have the capacity to help you build boundaries and find out who you are, and you just have to be open to it, right? Like when I got out of prison, I went back to a coach of mine and I told him, I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge that you tried to be a father to me. And I was so angry that my father was gone, and I spent so much energy on that I didn't acknowledge the men who tried to be there. And so if there are someone, then I would say give them a chance to be there, because ultimately we need to see love. We need to see compassion. We need to see empathy. We need to see what it looks like.
And I want to ask you and having changed your mindset, you know, like how was that transgression for you? Like, how did you come about to like, man, what I'm doing, this is not okay, you know, because working on your self-growth, I say this many times, like, there's a difference between being sober and being in recovery. And being in recovery is working on not just being sober, but also working on your personal growth, on your self-growth, on yourself. And, you know, not replacing one addiction for another. So,
and that's partially why I wanted to talk about some of my struggles, because oftentimes you meet someone and you see the finished product or what you perceive to be the finished product, but it doesn't happen overnight. The same way I didn't become a gang member overnight, I didn't become angry or violent overnight, I didn't become this person overnight. I gradually started to learn about spiritual principles, integrity, love, compassion, and I started to set that as a standard of my life. And when I would fail, I would go back to God and I would go back to my community and I would say, hold me accountable because this is the person I want to be. And it came in stages where one area I would be doing great, in another area I would be challenged in. But what I did was, for me, what recovery is not living a compartmentalized life. It's bringing all of these components together and striving to be the same person in all my relationships. Step 12 talks about practicing these principles in all of your affairs. For me, I was a different person with every person I was with because I was projecting an image. So what I had to do was first be okay with being vulnerable. And then over time, I slowly but surely started to present myself and to be okay that as a human being, I have flaws. Not make excuses for them, but to acknowledge them and say, can you hold me accountable? And it took time, and I'm still working on it. I'm still working on learning how to love myself. I'm still working on dealing with being impulsive. I'm still working on overwhelming myself. But I have a community of individuals who are holding me accountable, and to the day I die, I'm going to continue to progress. I knocked on her door, she panicked. What's wrong? Did you get in trouble? And I hugged her and I said, these are for all the hugs I couldn't give you. And she just cried. And what I realized before I got out of prison was I had spent so much time focused on the harm I caused my victims, the harm I caused society, the harm I caused myself, that I didn't realize that my mother lost her son the day I went to prison. And so I started to intentionally repair that relationship and to tell my mother that I see you as a person now. Right? Like, as my mother, I held you to an unrealistic expectation. But as a person, I see that you went through your own things, and I'm here as your son to tell you that I thank you for doing the best that you can. Right? I thank you for coming home. Right? Like, my mother worked 12-hour shifts. Well, she leave at 6. She didn't get home till 8. She was eating and going to sleep. To me, as a kid, I felt neglected. As an adult, I feel honored that I had a mother who was willing to sacrifice so much time to provide for some very, very ungrateful kids. And I take that time to speak and let youth know right now that what you see now isn't the whole picture, right? Like, it's just part of it. And so I have a very, very healthy relationship with my mom. She calls me. She actually was able to come down to Prison Way and to see a workshop we did. And I feel truly blessed and honored to still have her and to be at a point now where there's no resentment and there's no discord. Like, there's an actual like love and affection for my mom.
Your father?
Yes. I this upcoming May, and my goal is to go see my father and to take my daughter. I had a daughter while I was in prison. She's 7 years old. And my goal is to take my daughter to go see my father and to show him that he has a reason to change, like to give, to inspire him, right? Like, not to judge him or not to like look down on him. And I also told my father, like, you know, I don't hold a grudge against you. You did the best you can. But yes, I definitely want to, because I feel that I can reach him in a way that other people can't. Right? I've been in prison and came home, and he's still on the level 4. He's still politicking, and I feel like he needs to see the product of hope, right? I have my baby in prison. Like, he's been a great grandfather to her. I'll give him that. He's been a better grandfather than a father. And I really look forward to that visit.
And we can all stand, you know,